everyone. Welcome back to the CONVO Couch. I am Fiorella Isabel, and today we have a special one-on-one interview with Greg Palast. He is like the leading guru on election integrity. He's done work with the ACLU. He's talked about 2016 and what happened with the Bernie Sanders campaign and the primary. So, Greg, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, glad to be with you, Fiorella. And most people, by the way, know me as an investigative reporter for Rolling Stone and previously The Guardian and BBC Television out of London. And I've been on the kind of vote-bending, vote theft beat since 2000 when I uncovered that Katherine Harris and Jeb Bush removed tens of thousands of black folk in Florida in 2000, calling them felons. Their only crime, there wasn't one felon, only crime was voting while black. That elected George W. Bush president. And that's when I began really a whole journalistic field of uncovering vote manipulation. Until then, everyone thought, oh, we had wonderful elections like they tell you they do in elementary school. It's not true. In fact, I don't think we've had an honest election in 250 years.
So that's when really you go sad back, when you think about it.
Yeah,
really
we don't have straight elections in America. It's a good imitation of democracy, however.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to bring you here because I'm already hearing about situations and discrepancies happening already before the 2020 primary. I was at a meeting where someone let us know that through the Democratic clubs, they are taking information from rosters and from the roster and the roles that people have, and they are giving this information. When you join a Democratic club, you do endorsements and you do that sort of thing. While they can't look up your voter registration, technically anybody can do that. They don't focus on that, but they can give this information to certain people who have ties to the establishment. And thereby, a lot of people were saying that they were finding themselves not registered. And so I posted this tweet, and several people came up and said, "Oh, I checked my registration because of this tweet, and I'm not registered anymore." And I made sure they double checked, like if you moved it from the city or if you put the wrong street or whatever it was. And a lot of people are finding that they're not registered. And then also people started telling me about 2016, which I remember. I was here in California, and I remember how big of a mess that was. But because we don't want the same repeat of 2016, we need to move ahead. We need to be proactive and not reactive to this situation. So I wanted to start by asking your take on 2016 and what went on in a condensed form and what we could learn from it going into 2020.
Okay, here's the skinny. Let me tell you. Bernie Sanders won the Democratic primary in 2016, and it was stolen right out of his hands. This is no different than the methods that I reported in Rolling Stone, the way Trump shoplifted his election, by the way I reported for The Guardian, BBC, George W. Bush shoplifted his elections. But so you're not going to get the story about how those behind Hillary Clinton stole the election from Bernie Sanders, but I'm going to give it to you. Despite, I want to give you a warning from the Washington Post of all things, the Bezos newsletter, which is the Amazon Post, which is a writer said Greg Palast. Oh, he said, I should say, Isabella. It said respected journalist Greg Palast. So I quote that out all the time. Washington Post, Greg Palast, respected journalist. Respected journalist Greg Palast has lent his name to conspiracy theories that Bernie Sanders won the California primary in 2016. So I called up this putz. That's a journalistic term for an untutored reporter. So I called up this putz and said, since when is arithmetic a conspiracy theory? I kid you not.
Yeah,
and he was really
seriously
scared because they read these a lot of these reporters have to read my stuff in journalism school, so he was nervous. So I maybe I went too far. I said no. You call me if you're going to attack me and get the information, because this is a hard calculation. I used to teach statistics, by the way, at Indiana U, and so then he did it again. But okay, here's the numbers. Here's what happened. Okay, Are you ready for this? Go to the California Secretary of State's website, and you will find that about 750,000 ballots, 750,000 ballots were never counted in the 2016 primary in June of 2016. Now, how the hell does that happen? Okay, the answer is they were disqualified ballots, ballots that were spoiled, disqualified, not counted. How do you discount or how do you spoil a ballot? It's real simple. Almost all those ballots that were not counted were cast by people who are in the election business are called NPP voters, no party preference. You might call them independent voters. And by the way, if you register independent, you're not an independent voter. You've just registered for the Independence Party, which is a right-wing freak-out party. If you want to join that, that's fine. But understand, it's not. If you check a box when you register as independent, you've just made a big mistake because that's the Independent Party. You have to register no party preference if you want that. But don't ever do that. Don't ever do that, because here's what happened. Here's what happened, Isabella. Okay, you had a couple million NPP voters. Those NPP voters had heard that you can be a no-party preference voter but still vote in the Democratic primary. Well, kind of, but it is so impossible. It's like kind of jumping 11 feet in the air. It is conceivable but unlikely to have your vote cast or counted. But here's what you have to do. So, for example, in 2016, which will happen, by the way, this coming year, if you are an NPP, no party preference voter, you have to ask not for a Democratic Party ballot. You can't get a Democratic Party ballot, okay? If you ask for a Democratic Party ballot,
they might give it to you.
They might or might. First of all, if they give you a Democratic Party ballot, you are screwed, because what will happen is you're not entitled to a Democratic Party primary ballot because you're an NPP voter. Now, the Democratic Party will let you cast votes if you ask for something called, are you ready? You have to specifically ask for the crossover Democratic Party ballot. Got that? Crossover Democratic Party ballot. So a lot of people didn't know that, so they asked for a Democratic Party ballot. The little old lady behind the desk, she didn't know it, so she handed you a Democratic Party ballot. Then guess what? When they go to count it, boom, that ballot is thrown in the big dumpster, okay, with hundreds of thousands. In fact, in Los Angeles County was the one exception. Los Angeles County, 66,000 ballots were cast by NPP voters on Democratic Party ballots, and therefore they are about to be literally thrown away. But I will give credit to the county clerk of Los Angeles County, who in the end, when there were complaints, said, I'm going to go with the old rule, voter intent counts. These people, we shouldn't have a gotcha rule. Yeah. Their votes counted. But throughout the state of California, you had hundreds of thousands. Let me repeat that. Hillary Clinton won by about 200 and some thousand votes. Way more than that. Bernie Sanders ballots were disqualified. Now, how do I know they're Bernie Sanders ballots? Because the Roper poll, which is the gold standard of polling in California, the Roper poll said that the NPP voters who voted 3 out of 4 for Bernie Sanders. And if you do the arithmetic for the NPP voters' ballots that were disqualified, and then there was another way that they were disqualified, okay? So you go in, you're an NPP voter, you say, I want a Democratic Party ballot. Now, in Santa Rosa and Orange County, in Santa Rosa, for example, and some other counties in California, they were told if someone asks for an NPP, if an NPP voter asks for a Democratic Party ballot, you have to say, you can't get that. You're not allowed to tell them what you can qualify for is a crossover ballot.
Right.
Now, there's nothing in the law which says you can't tell the voter, by the way, you are entitled to a Democratic crossover ballot. But if they didn't know those magic words like Mother May I, they didn't get a ballot. They didn't understand it.
And a lot of those people weren't properly trained anyway. They were just picked from the street. So the
people behind, and then in Orange County, they were deliberately misleading the poll workers. They actually told the poll workers, and we have this recorded. They were telling poll workers in Orange County, if an NPP voter asks for a Democratic Party ballot, you give them a pink slip. See this? Look at this pink piece of crap here. This is called what I call a placebo ballot, but it's otherwise known as a provisional ballot. Okay, let's see if I can get that over here.
You don't want that.
Provisional ballot. Now, a provisional ballot is like a back-of-the-bus ballot. They were invented mainly for black people, but they're used against Bernie Sanders voters in California.
Interesting.
Now, what do I mean that they were invented for black people? After I ran my story in 2000 in The Guardian and BBC Television that thousands of black people were removed from the voter rolls, they called them felons. By the way, look it up. Go to gregpalast.com and you can see these stories. So I want you to know that. Go to gregpalast.com. I am promoting that. By the way, I have a not-for-profit foundation. I don't make any money off this, guys. Zero, nothing, nada. But I will say, you can read those stories, and what happened is that the Congressional Black Caucus demanded that there be a way for people to vote if they were wrongly purged from the voter rolls. Mm-hmm. So they created this thing called a provisional ballot. Now, the problem is, Isabella, that they got the provisional ballot, the right to a provisional ballot, but they didn't get the right to have it counted.
Right.
And so most aren't. Now, if you go to the Elections Assistance Commission, that's the official agency of the U.S. that kind of tracks this shit. Excuse me, this stuff. And
it's cool.
The provisional, okay. Officially, 2.7 million provisional ballots were cast in the last presidential election. 2.7 million. Over 1 million of them were thrown out. Now, understand that only some jurisdictions report their provisional ballots.
Right.
And so it's about 5 million. People don't even know this in America. About 5 million ballots were cast provisionally, and roughly 2 million were never counted. And I got to tell you something. If there's a contested election, they don't count them at all. Because here's the thing. When you fill out a provisional ballot, look at this thing. It's like taking the SAT, right? It's like taking the SAT.
Any one mistake.
Any one mistake.
Yep.
And not only that, but if you, for example, are an NPP voter in California and you filled out a provisional ballot, provisional ballot, you aren't entitled to the provisional ballot, so it's disqualified. So they disqualified Democratic Party ballots filled out by NPP voters, provisional ballots filled out by NPP voters, and a lot of people lost their vote completely.
So you're saying that those NPP voters who were given a provisional ballot weren't supposed to have it, so they didn't count it anyway.
Right, you can't get one. You're not entitled to a provisional ballot.
And they're not entitled to a Democratic ballot, so those didn't count anyway.
And are you ready for this? I was in my polling station, which is just below the Hollywood sign, actually. In my polling station, so usually, this is a privileged place. It's like white people voting, usually no problems. It's a white privilege voting station. They come out to your car with a little portable thing, and they have cookies and cannabis and whatever the hell else you want. And but there's a lot of Bernie voters, so now they had to get rid of these. So to get for an NPP voter to get the crossover ballot, you have to bring in most Californians, a little more than half of all Californians get a ballot mailed to them. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have a ballot mailed to you, and that's most people in California, if you have a ballot mailed to you, you have to turn in the ballot in order to get that. Because people say, hey, where's Bernie Sanders on the ballot? Well, schmuck, you didn't sign for a party preference, and it is a party primary. So, of course, you didn't get. There's no Bernie Sanders or anyone, or Hillary Clinton or anyone on the ballot. There's no Democratic primary on a non-party preference ballot.
So to clarify, when you get the ballot, if you don't get the Democratic crossover ballot, it doesn't have the presidential race on it. Right. It has everything else.
And you can't just go and say, no, I don't want that ballot. I want the other one. I want the Democratic Party ballot. Or, using the correct words, I want the crossover Democratic Party ballot. Well, here's the problem. You have to bring in your ballot.
Right.
Because they'll say otherwise you could vote both, which is ridiculous because they could track that easily. But they say you can. Here you go. You get the. So you have to literally bring in your ballot. Now, are you ready for this? So the woman in front of me brings in her ballot. She knew everything. She'd heard me on the radio. She knew. Oh yeah, I heard you. You got to bring in your ballot. You got to ask for a crossover Democratic Party ballot. I'm NPP voter. And she was so proud. She did all the steps, and they said, where's your envelope? She said, what do you mean? She says, oh, the ballot came with an envelope. You have to return the envelope.
Are you
Now,
serious?
I said to the poll worker, I said, the purpose of them turning in the ballot is so that they don't vote two. They can't vote an empty ballot. And she said, that's the rules. Now, you have to understand, whenever the little old lady behind the desk says that's the rules, she's bullshitting you. She has no goddamn idea what the rules are because everyone makes it up as they go. And when they write down the rules, they're always wrong. They're half the time they're unconstitutional. So what am I telling you? I'm telling you this. If you register as a no party preference voter, kiss your primary ballot goodbye. The chance that it will count is damn slim. Yeah, there's all kinds of tricks that you're supposed to do, but if you run into some little lady behind the desk who insists you got to get a provisional ballot, well, you just lost your vote, and you can argue with her, and she's going to call the cops, and you're going to end up, with a disorderly, and still you won't have a vote.
Are they going to give you the runaround? They'll tell you to go to Norwalk and then see what you can do
by
there.
the way, one nice thing about Los Angeles is that you can go, if there's a problem, you can just go to the county offices. Now, Los Angeles County is physically the largest county in the planet, in the entire world. Do you know that? There's no county anywhere that's as big as Los Angeles.
Wow.
So you get to drive 2 hours in rush hour traffic, 3 hours to Norwalk, try to find the office, wait in line, and fill out a ballot there. So they don't want you to vote. The Democratic, start with this. The Democratic Party establishment hates you. The Democratic Party establishment does not want you to vote. And if you vote, they don't want to count your ballot. So how do you get around this problem? It's easy. Ready? Write this down. Register as a Democrat. Now, let me explain something to you. For those who say, yeah, but I don't know. I don't always vote for Democrats, and I don't know if I'm really a Democrat.
Or you hate them. A lot of people hate them.
Think of it this way. Have you ever gone to a gay bar just to have fun and dance? It doesn't mean you're gay, right? But you have to still go into the bar, right? So if you want to have some fun, right? Okay,
exactly.
Cool. That doesn't mean anything, right?
No, I agree with you.
It doesn't mean about your preference. It doesn't matter. Okay, now, you can join the Democratic Party and that doesn't mean you're a jerk. It just means that you want to vote in the Democratic primary. Now, understand, I want to say something, and a lot of Bernie people won't like this. I know Bernie Sanders won't like this, and he's an old friend of mine, by the way. I think that all primaries should be closed. No one should vote in the primary who isn't a member of the party because it is the party's choice for a candidate. And what it does is create massive confusion and problems. And so if people understood that you can't really vote unless you join that party, and by the way, Republicans don't have this problem. Republicans do not have an open primary in California, just so you know. If you are an NPP voter, you can't say, oh, give me the crossover Republican ballot, because Republicans don't have crossover ballots. If you're not a registered Republican, you cannot vote in the California Republican primary.
Right.
So remember that. If you want to vote Republican, that's your choice. You're going to have to register as a Republican. And if you want to vote as a Democrat, as a practical matter, you have to register as a Democrat. Now you say, well, I've already registered. Well, that's real easy. You go online and you change your registration to Democrat. Again, only if you want to vote in the Democratic primary, and you can change back right afterwards. You can do whatever the heck you want, but protect your vote. Now, that brings us to one other thing before I forget in terms of protecting your vote, okay? Especially in California. I know someone who's very sophisticated who thought that they had registered, and I said, assumed that they had registered, that they'd voted. Well, I tell everyone 3 months before the election, 2 months before the election, do it twice. Go online to the Office of the Secretary of State, or you can put myvote.org or other places that'll get you to those web pages, and type in your name and see if you're registered in California. Well, I did that. Greg Palast, I typed in my name. I was on a show like this. I said, well, it's really easy to do. And here, look at my computer. Blah, 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 blah. I typed in Greg Palast at the Secretary of State's office. It says, no such voter. I kid you not. It was me. So I re-registered right there. And one final bit of advice. That's never final. I always have something else to say. But one other bit of advice. If you see someone with a clipboard who says, are you registered to vote? Let me register you. Don't do it, okay? Register online. People say, yeah, but No. If you register online, you get immediate confirmation, and you can print out your confirmation. If you register on a piece of paper, are you ready for this? In California, up to 45% of people who are registered on paper never get registered. First of all, A lot of it's innocent, by the way, because they can't read your name. They can't read all your information. You get one digit wrong, you're screwed, you're done, you're shot. Okay? Now, when you had a Republican Secretary of State in California, a guy named McPherson, a total scumbucket. Literally, the majority of Hispanics and Asian Americans did not get registered who filled out those little yellow pieces of paper. Always register online so that you can confirm it. And if you because if you register online and you leave out a line, in my case, you have to actually, like, by the way, that includes if you think you've filled out your registration at the DMV when you got your license renewed, go back online, you better check. That's where I made my mistake. Now, when you get your driver's license, it has your address, right, in 2 places. They don't carry it over to your registration form. You have to put that in again twice. So I missed one time of putting in my address for the 4th time, and I think the forms have changed slightly now. So check online. If you registered at the DMV or you registered on a piece of paper, check online. Always check 60 days before the election so you have enough time to re-register. Make sure your address is exactly correct, your name is spelled exactly correct, and you've got a party preference if you want to vote in a primary, which is coming up in March. You better put yourself down as Democrat if you want to vote in the Democratic primary.
And that sucks because a lot of people, like you were saying, like they absolutely hate the Democratic Party. They will not register Democrat. But I've been pleading to people, like, I know you hate them, but the day after you can just leave because it's already hard enough. It's going to be 10 times as hard if you choose to go MPP.
It's so difficult to actually vote if you're not a registered Democrat in the Democratic primary.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you have the rule books and the law in your hands. Someone behind the desk may not know it, and they may, for example, take your proper crossover ballot and put it in the wrong envelope. There's all kinds of goof-ups, and you've signed the outside of the envelope.
How do you feel about voter mail, vote by mail?
I'm not a big fan of going postal, okay? And I'll tell you why. And if you watch, okay, I'm going to now give you, ready? One more plug. Are you ready? This is my film. Here, I'm handing it to the best engineer in America who's going to show you the film. It's The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. This is the brand new, just came out, Activist Edition. And by the way, if you have Amazon, it's free on Amazon Prime, or go to gregpalast.com or any of the other crappy places where you get film. And download The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, or get a disc if you go to gregpalast.com. And there's a scene in there with 2 voters in San Diego, here in California, who mailed in their ballot, and their ballots were not counted because they had written in the name of a candidate, Donna Fry, who ran for mayor of San Diego, and she actually won. And then her votes were challenged because you had to write in her name. Imagine winning a big election with a write-in. And Donna Fry. And all these people wrote in her, but 5,000 people who wrote in her name on write-in candidate didn't fill in the little bubble next to her name. And their votes were then disqualified. So you'll see these people in my film. They're my parents.
Oh.
They're my parents. And my sister, who's a lawyer, filled out one, and she messed it up. My mother is a school teacher, and she messed it up. Somehow my father got it right. But anyway, so all I can tell you is when you mail in a ballot, you make any error in the ballot that you mail in, and you're screwed. Right. So, for example, in California, if you write an X, okay, so you're voting, and you write an X next to, you vote for write-in John McCain. He's dead, but you insist on putting him in. But you put an X next to his name. That vote will not count. You can vote for dead people, but you can't put an X next to their name. If you put an X next to someone's name, the vote doesn't count. You put a check mark next to their name, to your candidate's name, it doesn't count. You fill in the bubble in California. Now, that's in the mail-in ballot. Now, the nice thing about going into a voting station is that California, unlike some other states like Michigan, which has scanned paper ballots, so do we have a nice little plastic template and a little kind of plunger marker. So it's very hard to make a mistake. Furthermore, if you go into the polling station in California, they have a reader in the station. So you take your ballot, stick it in the machine, and if you've made a mistake, like you say you voted for two people for the same office by accident, it will kick it back out and say, dummy, you made a mistake. Or, you folded the ballot, something. So if you mail it in and you make a mistake, you stand a chance of getting your ballot disqualified. Plus, you do things like a lot of states, and again, California is not one state when it comes to voting. It's all these counties, and they're all separate. So, for example, in some counties, you registered using your middle name, and when you sent in your absentee ballot, you signed it with your middle initial. You just lost your vote. Goodbye. Poof. So now, don't do that. So I think it's always better if you can. I'm usually traveling and, covering elections, so I almost always have to mail in my ballot. If you have to, you have to. But if you can take the time, it's better to go. And as Jesse Jackson, my co-producer on this film, says, arrive with 5. Make it a party.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make it a democracy event. And by the way, there's also now easier early voting in California and Los Angeles. And so now take advantage of that too. Go in early if you can. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Because if you go in early and there's a problem with your registration, you might be able to get that thing straightened out.
And Los Angeles and the rest of California in general are changing the way they do the primaries. First of all, we're having it in March 3rd, which is super early. And then we're also doing the city council, the congressional races. We're doing it all.
So you're going to have a lot of races,
exactly.
By the way. So by the way, don't walk in thinking, "Oh, I'm just going to vote." I'm going to vote for Donald Trump or whatever you're going to do, and then say, "Oh, wait, there's like congressmen and stuff." No, be aware that you've got everything, and you should get the information on who you want to vote for. Often groups put out little, sample.
Yeah.
Here's your ballot. I tend to get get advice from the teachers union, for example. That's a good place to go. Or there's different groups.
The nurses union, the teachers
union, whatever. I'm not telling you what to do. You're the Klan, whatever your preference is. That's up to you. This is a democracy.
It's true. It's true. How because of how everything's changing in California, though, do you think they make it seem like it's going to be good because now you can vote? For instance, you're going to be able to go in and vote in Glendale, even if you live in La Cunada.
Right.
So they're saying that's going to be easier, but they're new machines and it's a new system for these machines. So that's going to throw everything off. Same thing in Arizona,
I'm going to tell you. There's always problems with virgins. It's the first time you're using this machine. There's
nice analogy.
There's issues, okay? And so that's why I like going in for an early vote, because if you say you go in and vote early and they say, well, you're not here, or someone else has voted because your name is John Smith, they say, oh, John Smith has voted, but they say, well, no, that's the other guy next door with my same birthday, which happens a lot. And so do vote early. I am concerned about the new machinery and the new system, and especially because a lot of the voting is now going to be done. Are you ready for the scary line? At the DMVs. Mm-hmm. Whoever came up with that dumbass idea. Okay, California DMVs cannot handle driver's licenses, let alone our democracy. That was clearly, you could see Alex Padilla's spider-like mind at work here. Alex Padilla, if you don't know, is the guy who pretends to be our Secretary of State. He's the guy in charge of our voting and democracy. He hates democracy, okay? I mean, he has pictures of Putin under his pillow. That's how much what he thinks of democracy. But I've heard that. It's just a rumor, and I'm as a journalist, I have to say I haven't yet confirmed that, though it's clear that Alex Padilla, when you talk about someone who he engineered that disaster where the Bernie voters, hundreds of thousands of Bernie voter ballots were thrown out in June of 2016. And guess what? Alex Padilla, while he's running the vote, at the same time was running Hillary Clinton's election campaign. I saw that in Florida with Catherine Harris, Cruella DeVille herself, who was chairwoman of the Bush campaign while she's in charge of counting the votes. Padilla did the same thing in California. He's a Catherine Harris of California, and a very I mean, he's I'm going to be very straight about it. And this is not a partisan thing. He's just a walking danger to democracy.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's still Secretary of State up.
So look out. This guy does not want
2020.
your vote to count. Okay, that's very important. He has a thing against Hispanic voters too, which is interesting. Maybe he doesn't like his
ironic.
mom. I don't know, or his dad. I have no idea what's going on there. The psychologist has got to work on this. But if you're a Hispanic voter in California, you're in danger. So be very careful if you want to register vote in the Democratic Party. This is Greg Palast, by the way, if you just tuned in. And this is my film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. You can also, until Patriot Act 3 goes into effect, you can read the book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, which is a raging bestseller no matter what they try to do to stop it.
So a lot of people are very skeptical still, even after 2016, even after what happened in Arizona, in Brooklyn, in Nevada. They're still very skeptical because they don't know how you could possibly know that. How could possibly the Secretary of State or anybody change your vote? How could they unregister you? How could they do that? So what is the hypothesis? Like, how could they do that? People want evidence.
So that's why I was explaining. In fact, I asked Alex Padilla, made an official Freedom of Information request. By the way, information in California is supposed to be free. That's the law, Alex, which you're ignoring. And I said, give me the final count. And his response was to start taking stuff off his website, because you used to there was a lot of information. That's how I know that
there's not much, though.
750,000 votes were not counted. Were disqualified in 2016. You look at the number of voters and the number of the total count, and you'll see that disparity of 750,000. And I wanted to get the exact reason for each of these ballots disqualified. It's huge. And so most of it's done by disqualifying the ballot that you cast.
Okay.
The second way that they do it is that your registration is missing. Now, when you had Debbie Bowen, who is a fantastic Secretary of State before Padilla, and I spoke to her. I was working with Bobby Kennedy. We were co-writing articles for Rolling Stone magazine, and we were able to speak to Deborah Bowen, and she said, look, they were removing people who had what she called unusual names because they couldn't key them in off those pieces of paper. And unusual names, but like Garcia Marquez. She said Mohammed. She says lots of spellings of Mohammed. And when they're keying them in, they make mistakes. Now, here's the thing. If they were keying in members of country clubs and their names were falling off the list, if they misspelled Trump, somehow.
I don't know how.
Okay. Yeah. Then you'd people be screaming, but misspelling Muhammad and also things like accents on a name, etc., it's murder. And you know what else? You want to hear a horrific story? A lot of Korean Americans in Los Angeles signed their absentee ballot. It requires your signature. Now, Koreans in Los Angeles, a lot of them sign, they're American citizens, but they still sign their name using Korean alphabet. Well, when they registered to vote, they didn't sign using the Korean alphabet. You can't. And they didn't know that. It just says sign it, right? So they signed it. And thousands of Korean Americans lost their vote because they said not a valid signature. Yes. And, the problem is 90% of the time, there's no record of your losing your vote. So this is Greg Palast. If you go to my website, you can and type in Bernie Sanders, you will see the issues that happened up in California. You also see my discussion with Bernie Sanders about vote suppression nationwide, bigger issues that aren't California specific. California has its own particular horrific vote suppression techniques, which are different than other states. Right.
We see Republicans suppressing votes in Texas, for instance. The Secretary of State had to resign amidst that. And then we saw it in Georgia, as you've been working on.
Right. So, by the way, if you want to go, I have some great reports out of Georgia, which I did for Salon.com on film. And so go to gregpalast.com or Salon.com and type in Palast. And what you'll see is I actually sued the state of Georgia to get the list of all the people they purged. You ready for this? They purged over 500,000 people just before the election. It was done by the Secretary of State, the Alex Padilla of Georgia. Was a guy named Brian Kemp, a Republican. Now, Brian Kemp was running for governor While he's Secretary of State, he removes 500,000 people just before the election. And of course, who are those 500,000 people? Well, I know exactly. I'm not guessing. I actually sued him, and I got the list from Brian Kemp of the names of the people he purged from the voter rolls. It was a legal battle. Then I went through the list. Now, he said that 500,000 people had moved out of the state or out of their county. I paid my foundation, the Palast Investigative Fund, paid a massive amount of money to get 4 firms from Silicon Valley to go through every single name of every purge voter of Georgia, 500,000 names. And we found that, are you ready for this number? 340,134 voters. 340,134 voters who lost their vote because they supposedly moved. They'd never moved anywhere. They'd never moved anywhere. And this is the trick. Also, Georgia and other states were using a system called cross-check. That's explained in my film. You'll see a guy that I jumped called Chris Kobach of Kansas. You know, the guy that Trump put in charge of the so-called voter fraud commission? Chris Kobach of Kansas. Also, he's the guy who came up with Trump, with the idea that Trump can make Mexico pay for the wall. He wrote SB 1070, the unconstitutional driving while brown law. He wrote the laws saying you have to prove you're a citizen to vote. This is the new thing. Look out nationally for the Republicans doing this. They're going to tell you that you have to prove you're a citizen to vote. Now, here's the problem with that. We are not Red China. We don't have citizenship cards. We don't have them. Social Security. Okay, my Swiss assistant has a Social Security card. She has to. Driver's license. She has a California driver's license. If you drive, you have to. None of these things are proof of citizenship. Guess what? Chris Kobach removed 2 officers of the United States Air Force because they couldn't prove they're citizens. Military service. If you're in the military, that's not proof of citizenship because we have some aliens in the U.S. military. The only thing that proves it are 2 items. Your birth certificate, which tens of thousands of students couldn't find their birth certificates. It stopped them from voting. That was the main group. People think it'll stop. Oh, that's to get rid of the Hispanic vote. No, it's get rid of the student vote. And the second, it gets rid of the poor vote because the other document that does prove your citizenship is a passport. And very few Americans not of the white persuasion have passports. So they know who they're knocking out. Young people, poor people, students with this prove your citizenship thing. Now, that was knocked out by the federal courts in Kansas. But look out because Chris Kobach is going to argue that before the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court. So this is a very big danger. Register to vote and vote. And I'm going to tell you something else. A lot of people say, well, if they're going to steal your vote, why should I bother? The answer is, don't steal your own vote. No, it's not easy. I remember when Obama went the day before the 2016 election, ridiculously, he said in Philadelphia, it only takes a couple of minutes to vote. Yeah, if you're president and they bump everyone out of the way with the Secret Service. Yeah. It doesn't. It's a job. You have to check your registration a couple of months before the election. You have to show up. You may have to wait in line. Vote early. You may have to argue with them about. And by the way, if they try to give you a placebo ballot, this provisional ballot crap, I call it the placebo ballot because it makes you think you voted when you haven't. Argue. Don't punch. Don't scream, but be firm. I cannot tell you how many voters have won their right to vote just by saying, you're going to give me my ballot. Yeah. You're going to give, and the great broadcaster Carrie Harrison actually got a cop, grabbed a cop off the street,
read about it,
brought him into the polling station, say, this lady does not want to give me my ballot. Tell her to give me my ballot, and not a provisional bullshit ballot, not a placebo play ballot, a ballot. And the cop said, give him a ballot.
Yeah.
So being firm
democracy
is really good, and that's why the other reason to go with a group of people, because it's always easier to raise your voice a bit and be firm when there's a few of you.
What do you think about being poll workers? Because a lot of my friends and I want to be trained on this, because a lot of the people in 2016, it wasn't even their fault. They were poorly trained. They were pulled off the street. In fact, 2 things. I want you to be a poll worker for 2 reasons. 1, so you can get it right. And 2, when they give you the wrong training, when they tell you if
NPP, California No Party Principal Voters, give them a provisional ballot, and you think that's wrong, you call me, or you get a hold of Greg Palast. You go to gregpalast.com. It says contact Greg, because I do these stories of mistraining the poll workers.
Yeah.
And you want to get across to your fellow poll workers if you think something is BS. Also, you want to get across the information to the poll workers what's correct. People don't know, and now a lot of the rules have changed, and you want to help voters vote. If you're a poll worker, for example, places like I said, like Santa Rosa and some other counties, if an NPP voter, no party preference voter, came to you and said, I want a Democratic Party ballot, and they were told, you can't tell them they get a crossover ballot. That's not true. That's not true at all. That's a complete lie, because you're not telling them who to vote for, that they have to take it. You can say, you want a crossover ballot. But like I say, for God's sake, you want to register, you vote in the Democratic Party, in the Democratic primary, you have to become a Democrat, at least for the day. That's easy to do. You just get online, change your registration, Democrat, then you can change it back if that makes you uncomfortable, if you don't like to walk around with a D on your forehead. I don't, when you state a party preference, you're not stating the party you prefer. You're stating the primary you prefer to vote in. Think of it that way. You're buying the ticket, okay? That gets you into the show. And if you don't pick a party, the chance you'll be allowed to vote or your vote will count is not too good in California. And that's true all over. I tell people in other places with open primaries, you're crazy if you don't register in the party simply because it's so hard to get your vote counted.
What are you working on now? What have you been working on that you can let the audience know as far as, what you're doing with the ACLU?
Well, for example, one of the things I'm working on is I'm putting the final knife into a system called Crosscheck, which removed 1.1 million voters before the 2016 election. If you watch the film or read the book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, or go to my Rolling Stone articles from during the election, you'll see that there was a system created by Donald Trump's crony, Chris Kobach, in which he said, here's two people voting, one person voting in two states. Now, that's a federal crime.
Right.
He said 7.2 million people were doing this. Almost, and all with names like Jose Rodriguez and John Black, and you're getting the idea. 85 of the 100 most common names in America are minority names. So he took people who just shared nothing but first and last names. And by the way, 2 million people didn't share middle names. They literally are mismatched by middle names. Forget birthdays, okay? Middle names, all right? Mismatches. And they were using that to remove voters of color. Okay. That elected Donald Trump. So what I'm working on is Chris Kobach, the guy who ran this system, was ran for governor of Kansas, and he lost. I should say my film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, was shown by the League of Women Voters 60 times in the state before that election. Now, I am not partisan. I don't take any position in elections, but the League of Women Voters credits me for getting Chris Kobach out for Chris Kobach's loss. I won't take any credit for that, but I will say thank you. Now, now the thing is, so Kansas has stopped generating these nasty racist hit lists. However, some states are still removing people based on the old lists. That's 1 million voters. I want to get them back on. I want to work with the ACLU to try to get the 340,134 voters of Georgia wrongly removed back on the rolls. And nationwide, I'll be covering all this stuff. I'm going to keep my eye on California, see what little tricky stuff Alex Padilla does. There's a couple major newspapers that are talking to me about what I can do for them and on the investigation while I also film. So you'll see my stuff somewhere or other, but you can always see my stuff at gregpalast.com. So even when I write for Rolling Stone or The Guardian or whatever, I always make sure that they allow me to put it up so that everyone could see it.
Right.
I don't ever agree to put any of my work behind a paywall. So you can always go to gregpalast.com and find out where the stuff is.
Just one last question before we go. I want to ask you, as far as Bernie Sanders and the leftist candidates, the progressives candidates like the Tulsis, maybe the Warrens to some people, what should the campaigns be doing to make sure that their people, their supporters that are, like you see Bernie Sanders' rallies, thousands of people go to his rallies, that those people get to vote?
Right. Well, number one, I was really disappointed. And again, Bernie Sanders is an old friend of mine. I'm not saying whether I voted for him or not. He's just an old friend. Okay. And I should say, in fact, what's interesting, he was, when I spoke, as I do, with the Congressional Black Caucus on vote suppression issues, you don't have to be black, by the way. There's no color requirement to be in the Congressional Black Caucus. So Bernie Sanders was in the Congressional Black Caucus. People don't realize this. He would actually go to the caucus meeting. So Bernie Sanders showed up when he heard I was around. So we talked about some of these vote suppression issues. The problem is when he came to California, either I suspect it wasn't his staff properly briefing him. His staff may not have known about the complexities and the dangers of voting in California. He should have spent a few minutes saying, my friends, if you are not a registered Democrat, you are now about to enter into a hall of mirrors when you vote, and here's what you're going to have to do.
Right.
Now, I know he wants to talk about the banks, and I know he wants to talk about the 1%. But he should also, I would hope that this time he'll talk about here's how you vote. And that he puts it on the big jumbotrons. And that he says, here is a provisional ballot. And, don't take a provisional ballot. Here's what you have to do. You have to ask for the crossover Democratic Party ballot. And I would hope that this time his people registered almost 500,000 voters in 2016. Massive. But they didn't tell people to register as Democrats, and they should say, if you want to vote in the Democratic primary, register as a Democrat. And Bernie should be carrying that message, even though he feels that's unfair.
Which it
and
is.
It's not right.
That's not the
He
point.
should say, it's not fair, it's not right, but if you don't register as a Democrat, it's going to be a hellacious road to vote in the Democratic primary. And, so I would love to see all the candidates, all Democratic candidates say that. I've talked to Beto O'Rourke, and I've talked to Bernie Sanders and met with Bernie, and some of the candidates. I haven't met some of the others yet. I may never meet them. I don't know. We'll see how quickly they fall off the wagon. But and I met with Elizabeth Warren. But Bernie Sanders is very strong on vote protection, and when it comes to protecting the minority vote. But in California, it wasn't a minority vote question. He was very good on opposing the cross-check system, very strong in supporting Jesse Jackson's fight for the vote. Beto O'Rourke, the same thing. I don't know if many people know this, but Beto O'Rourke's dad was Jesse Jackson's campaign manager in Texas when the Reverend ran for president. So there's an old family connection with the Jacksons there. And so he's very, I should say both Bernie Sanders and Beto O'Rourke are the candidates who are most aware of the issue of vote suppression and the issue of suppressing the minority vote, which is the big issue nationwide. We still have massive Jim Crow voting, and unfortunately, the Democratic Party officially doesn't touch the subject. The only person who really makes an issue, because they don't want to talk about it, and I think they say things like, "Well, we don't want to talk about vote suppression because it'll make people think that their vote doesn't count." Blah blah blah. That's all bullshit.
Yeah.
You know what? What they want to do is avoid the issue of saying, because it's seen as a black issue, as an issue for black people. It's not seen as a voter issue, but a black issue, and they don't want to be seen in discussing black issues. That was even true, frankly, of Obama, who was very upfront about that question, that he wanted to be seen as above race, and that meant you don't talk about vote suppression. The number one voice on vote suppression is Stacey Abrams, and it's no accident that she is the one and only black woman who's ever run for governor of any state in America in American history, which is amazing. But as a black woman, she says, I'm going to talk about racial vote suppression. It happened. That's why I lost, the first candidate to ever say that. Though I will say John Kerry just said that cost him the election, too, after he read my book, Our Madhouse. But he didn't say it at the time. But later he said, yeah, they stole the election from me. And that's not much talked about. Kerry does say the election was stolen by suppressing the black vote in Ohio.
But shouldn't we be looking at legislation, though? Like legislation, I know Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard has an election securing Americans Elections Act. And a lot of Congress isn't supporting that. I mean, I think whether it's just a very basic thing, it at least cements a way to prevent this kind of rigging from happening, because truly we shouldn't have to tell people that if they're independents they can't participate in democracy. We shouldn't have to do that. And it to a lot of people it's like that they just won't register as a Democrat, and it sucks that we have to play their game, right? Like we need legislation. But in order to get those people in there, who will put it.
Well, first of all, we need to restore the legislation we have. The number one thing is the Voting Rights Act was gutted. Terrible. In 2013 by the U.S. Supreme Court. And I know that the New York Times loved that guy Kennedy, but he was basically as a practical matter, there was no difference between Justice Kennedy and a Klansman when it came to voting rights. I'm not kidding. And so we have to restore what we have. We have to enforce what we have, like the National Voter Registration Act, the Motor Voter Law. It's one of the things that I have lawyers suing over in Georgia and elsewhere. I'm a journalist, so I'm mainly on the informational end of that. But we have laws that aren't being enforced because guess who's president, right? One of the problems is that the people who steal the elections become the cops, the election cops.
Right. So
you got the robbers who are in charge of busting the robbers, and believe it or not, they don't. And this is a huge problem. In fact, you literally had the Justice Department lawyers literally got up and switched tables when Trump was elected in one of the major voting rights cases. They literally changed sides in the middle of the case. And which, by the way, never been done before. The Justice Department has a rule that you don't change sides when there's a new politician, but they did because they were scared for their jobs under Trump. So we have a problem that we have an unjustice department instead of a Justice Department. That's a big problem. I would like to see the laws and the debates, and why the Democratic Party is even hesitating on some of these issues. But there was H.R. 1, which had some improvements, and which was supported by Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party leadership. And of course, let's be realistic. Unless Democrats take the Senate, there ain't going to be no change in voting rights law, because Republicans understand if everyone votes, they lose.
Yep. Oh, that's the truth. Thank you so much for being here. And you can go ahead again, give everybody your website, where to find you, your social media.
Well, find me on Facebook, Greg Palast Investigates. Find me at Twitter at Greg_Palast. And find me at my website, because then you get not just 140 characters, you get the whole, the full Monty of my investigative reports at gregpalast.com. You can read the books, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, Vulture's Picnic, and Our Madhouse, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, and get the film. That can't be too painful. It's fun. It has Willie Nelson in it as a stoner musician, believe it or not. But he actually plays himself. You know, his vote was taken away illegally. So I talked to Willie Nelson. We've got Ice-T. We've got Richard Belzer from Law and Order. Well, I'm looking at this. What else do we have on there? Some great people. Ed Asner, who I just saw today, who plays Santa Claus and a billionaire in the film. It's a documentary, but it's not your PBS white guys in front of bookshelves documentary.
So it's not boring.
So go to Amazon, Greg Palast, and free on Prime, or gregpalast.com.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Convo out.